Sometimes the cheapest price you can pay costs you the most. Roy Barrett learned that when he bought the old house on Maple Ridge for $12,000, hoping it would give him and his daughter a fresh start. They spent 2 weeks fixing it up, patching walls and sanding floors. Then Nina heard the banging from below. Faint at first, like old pipes, but too steady, too desperate. It came from beneath the kitchen. In the cellar, behind a false wall, they found a trap door. Below that was a small, sealed room. Inside was a woman named Mara. She'd been trapped there for months. How does someone disappear in a town where everyone knows everyone? And why did nobody come looking? Before we continue, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Roy Barrett had turned 59 in a hospital waiting room, alone except for a vending machine and the fluorescent hum of institutional lighting. That was 8 months ago, the day his mother passed. 3 weeks later, the manufacturing plant where he'd worked for 23 years called an all-hands meeting. They were consolidating operations, moving production overseas. His severance package came in a manila envelope that felt obscenely thin for 2 decades of labor. The apartment went next. Without steady income, the rent became impossible. He'd burned through his modest savings caring for his mother in her final months. The good kind of spending, he told himself, even as his bank account dwindled to double digits. His ex-wife Diane had remarried years ago and moved to Arizona. Their daughter Nina was the only family he had left, and he'd barely seen her in the 5 years since the divorce. Pride kept him from calling her immediately. He spent 6 weeks sleeping in his truck, showering at the gym, applying for jobs that never called back. 59 was apparently the age where you became invisible to hiring managers. Too old to be trained, too expensive to be kept. He watched younger men get callbacks for positions he could do in his sleep. It was Nina who found him. She tried calling his old number, got a disconnect message, and drove 4 hours to his last known address. The landlord told her Roy had cleared out 2 months prior. She found him in a Walmart parking lot at 2 in the morning, engine running for heat, surrounded by plastic bags containing everything he owned. They didn't talk much that night. She just opened the passenger door and said, "Dad, come on." They drove to her apartment in silence. She made up the couch, brought him a pillow and blanket, and went to bed. In the morning, over coffee, they started the hard conversation. Nina was 31, recently out of a 7-year relationship that had ended badly. She worked as a freelance graphic designer, decent money, but inconsistent. Her apartment lease was month to month. She was tired of the city, tired of starting over in the same place. When she suggested they pool their resources and find something cheap in the country, Roy thought she was joking. "I'm serious," she said. "We both need a reset. Why not do it together?" They spent 3 weeks searching online listings, finding nothing but overpriced fixers or rural properties too remote. Then Nina found the house on Maple Ridge. The listing was sparse. 1920s farmhouse, needs work, motivated seller. The price made them both pause. $12,000. Roy's severance and Nina's savings combined could cover it with enough left over for basic repairs. The photos showed a structure that had seen better days. White paint peeled in long strips, exposing grey wood beneath. The porch sagged in the middle. Windows were intact but filthy. Still, the bones looked solid. The roof seemed sound. It had 2 bedrooms upstairs, 1 down, a kitchen, a bathroom and a cellar. 3/4 of an acre of overgrown yard. No neighbors visible in any direction. The real estate agent, a weary woman named Phyllis Crane, who also ran the local hardware store, met them at the property on a cold Tuesday in March. Granger Falls was barely a town, 847 residents, according to the faded welcome sign, though Phyllis admitted that number was optimistic. The old textile mill had closed 15 years ago, and most young people left as soon as they could. "Won't lie to you," Phyllis said, unlocking the front door. "Place has been empty since Eugene Fairmont died last September. Heart attack, they think. Found him in his truck at the grocery store. No family to claim the house, so it went to the county, and they just want it gone. Inside smelled of dust and abandonment. Furniture remained covered in sheets. The wallpaper was decades old, a faded floral pattern that might have been cheerful once. Floorboards creaked underfoot. The kitchen had ancient appliances and countertops with burn marks. Upstairs, the bedrooms were small but had decent closets. The bathroom fixtures were yellow with age, but functional. The cellar was accessed through a door off the kitchen. Concrete steps led down to a low-ceilinged space, cluttered with boxes, old tools, and the previous owner's accumulated debris. A furnace squatted in one corner, surprisingly modern. The foundation looked solid, no major cracks. Roy and Nina walked the property, checking window frames and testing doors. The place needed work, new paint, refinished floors, updated fixtures, but nothing structural seemed catastrophic. For $12,000, it was a gamble worth taking. They closed 2 weeks later. The paperwork was refreshingly simple. The county was happy to unload the property. Phyllis threw in a discount at her hardware store, said she admired people willing to invest in Granger Falls when so many were leaving. Moving in took one afternoon. Neither of them had much. Roy's truck held his clothes, some tools, and boxes of books. Nina arrived with her car packed tight. Laptop, design equipment, clothes, kitchen supplies she'd accumulated over the years. They picked bedrooms, Roy taking the downstairs space, Nina claiming the larger room upstairs. The first week was spent cleaning. They scrubbed floors, washed windows, wiped down every surface. The house slowly emerged from its neglect. Underneath the grime, the original craftsmanship showed through. Solid hardwood floors, thick plaster walls, built-in cabinets with careful joinery. Someone had built this house to last. They established a routine. Mornings, Roy tackled outdoor projects while Nina worked her design jobs. Afternoons, they renovated together. Evenings, they cooked simple meals and sat on the porch, watching the sun set over empty fields. Their conversation was careful at first, years of distance making them strangers. But gradually, they remembered how to talk. Nina learned her father had always wanted to work with his hands, that the factory job had been practical but never fulfilling. Roy discovered Nina's design work was more than corporate logos. She created branding for small nonprofits, helped community organizations find their voice. They'd both been drifting, searching for something neither could name. The town revealed itself slowly. Phyllis at the hardware store was friendly in a reserved way. The mailman, Vernon Tate, stopped to chat, welcomed them to the neighborhood. The grocery store cashier recognized them on the second visit, asked how the house was coming along. People were polite but not intrusive, a balance Roy appreciated. Still, there were oddities. The house had strange cold spots, places where the temperature dropped noticeably. The layout didn't quite make sense. Closets that seemed too shallow, walls that appeared thicker than necessary. Roy assumed it was just old construction, quirks of a different era. At night, the house settled with creaks and groans. Wind found gaps in the siding, creating whistles and moans. Nina joked about ghosts. Roy preferred to think of it as the house adjusting to having people again after months of emptiness. By the second week, they'd fallen into a comfortable rhythm. The house was becoming home. They'd sanded most of the downstairs floors, repainted the kitchen, fixed the porch steps. Nina hung curtains. Roy planted herbs in the kitchen window. Small acts of permanence. Neither of them mentioned how fragile it all felt, how easily it could collapse. They were both running from something, toward something, and this house was the bet they'd made together. $12,000 and faith that starting over was possible even when you'd lost everything before. The 14th day in the house started like the others. Roy woke early, made coffee in the ancient percolator they'd found in a cabinet, and headed outside to work on the porch railing. The morning was cool, clouds threatening rain but holding off. He'd developed a fondness for the quiet out here, the way sound carried differently without city noise to drown it out. Birds he couldn't name sang in the trees. The wind moved through tall grass like water. Nina slept later, her freelance schedule allowing flexibility. Around 9, Roy heard her moving around upstairs, the shower running, the familiar sounds of someone starting their day. By 10, she was in the kitchen, laptop open on the table they'd salvaged and refinished, working on a logo redesigned for a food bank in Pennsylvania. Roy worked until noon, then came in for lunch. They ate sandwiches standing at the counter, discussing whether to tackle the upstairs bathroom next or focus on the remaining downstairs rooms. Nina voted for the bathroom. Roy agreed, though he dreaded dealing with the ancient plumbing. After lunch, Roy went back outside. Nina returned to her laptop, but within 20 minutes she'd grown restless with the design project. She decided to start prep work in the kitchen, pulling down the old wallpaper, filling nail holes, getting surfaces ready for fresh paint. She put on music, rolled up her sleeves, and began scraping. The first sound came around 2:30. Nina almost missed it under her music, a faint tapping, rhythmic and distant. She paused, pulled out an earbud, listened. Nothing. She went back to scraping. 5 minutes later it came again. Tap, 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 pause, tap, 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 like someone knocking on a door far away, or pipes expanding with temperature changes. Old houses made noise, she reminded herself. Still, something about the rhythm felt wrong. Too regular, too deliberate. She turned off her music completely and stood still. The house settled into silence around her. Then underneath the quiet she heard it clearly, tapping coming from below, from beneath the kitchen floor. Nina's first instinct was to call Roy, but she hesitated. He'd been working hard all morning, deserved the break. This was probably nothing. Old plumbing, the furnace cycling, something mechanical and explainable. She could check it herself. The cellar door was off the kitchen, a heavy wooden thing with an old-fashioned latch. Nina had been down there only twice since moving in, both times with Roy. The space felt oppressive, crowded with the previous owner's abandoned belongings. She flipped the light switch at the top of the stairs. A single bulb illuminated concrete steps leading down. The air grew colder as she descended, musty, with an undertone of something else she couldn't identify. At the bottom she paused, listening. The furnace hummed quietly in the corner. Boxes and old furniture cast strange shadows. And there, faint but distinct, the tapping continued. Nina moved through the cluttered space, following the sound. It seemed to come from the far wall, the one facing the back of the house. She stepped around boxes of rusted tools, ducked under cobwebs, made her way to the concrete foundation. The tapping stopped. She stood in silence, feeling foolish. Just as she was about to turn back, it started again. Louder now, more insistent, definitely coming from the wall. She placed her palm against the cold concrete. The vibration traveled through the stone, unmistakable. Something on the other side was striking the wall. Nina ran upstairs, out the front door. "Dad!" Roy looked up from the porch railing, saw her expression, immediately set down his tools. "What's wrong?" "There's something in the cellar. Something behind the wall." They went down together, Roy carrying a flashlight. Nina led him to the far wall, and they stood listening. The tapping had stopped again, but Roy examined the wall carefully, running his hands along the concrete, tapping with his knuckles. In one section the sound changed. Hollow. "That's not right," he said. "Foundation walls shouldn't sound hollow." He moved along the wall, tapping methodically. A 6-foot section returned the hollow sound. The concrete looked the same as the rest. But when Roy examined it closely, he found a thin vertical line, almost invisible under years of grime. Then another, parallel to it, the outline of a door. "Help me move these boxes," Roy said. They cleared the space, revealing the full outline. Someone had concealed a doorway, covered it with material meant to look like the surrounding concrete. When Roy pushed against it, the entire section shifted slightly. "Get me a crowbar from my toolbox upstairs," Roy said. Nina ran up, returned with the tool. Roy wedged it into the seam, applied pressure. The false wall resisted, then gave way with a crack. Behind it, a wooden door, old but solid, with a heavy latch. They looked at each other. Nina's heart was pounding. Roy's hand was steady on the crowbar. "Maybe we should call someone," Nina said. "And tell them what?" "We found a door in our cellar." He was right. They had no idea what this was. Could be an old storage space, a root cellar, something entirely ordinary. But the tapping hadn't been ordinary. Something behind that door had been trying to get their attention. Roy lifted the latch. It moved smoothly, well-oiled despite the door's age. He pulled the door open. Behind it, stairs led down into darkness, a sub-basement deeper than the main cellar. The air that wafted up was stale, cold, wrong. Roy shone the flashlight down. Wooden steps, steep and narrow, descended about 10 feet. At the bottom, another door. This one had a padlock, new and shiny against the old wood. They descended carefully, the steps creaking under their weight. At the bottom, Roy examined the padlock. Industrial strength, the kind used on storage units and shipping containers. Someone had wanted this door to stay closed. "Dad, maybe we really should—" Roy swung the crowbar. The lock mechanism held, but the hasp pulled free from the old wood. 2 more strikes and the door could be opened. "Stay behind me," Roy said. He pushed the door open. The smell hit them first. Human waste, unwashed bodies, sickness. Roy's flashlight swept the small room. Reinforced walls, maybe 8 feet by 10 feet. A bucket in the corner. Empty water bottles. Food wrappers. A thin mattress on the floor. And on the mattress, a woman. She was curled into a ball, filthy, skeletal, her hair matted and wild. When the light hit her, she flinched, raising one arm to shield her eyes. Her other hand held a piece of metal pipe, the source of the tapping. For a moment no one moved. Then the woman lowered her arm, squinted at them and spoke. Her voice was a rasp, barely audible. "You're real." "You're actually real." Nina pushed past Roy, dropped to her knees beside the mattress. Oh my God, you're alive." The woman started to cry, silent tears cutting tracks through the grime on her face. She reached for Nina with a trembling hand, touched her arm as if to confirm she was solid. "How long have you been down here?" Roy asked, his voice tight. The woman's eyes were unfocused, struggling to comprehend the question. "I don't know, months." He stopped coming. "I thought I was going to die down here. I thought no one would ever find me." "Who stopped coming?" Nina asked gently. "The man, the one who lived here. He brought food, water, then he just stopped." She started shaking. "I've been screaming, banging, so long. I thought I was already dead." Roy pulled out his phone. No signal in the sub-basement. "I'm going up to call for help." "Nina, stay with her." He ran up both sets of stairs, dialed 911 with shaking hands. When the dispatcher answered, he struggled to find words. "I need an ambulance and the sheriff. We found someone. In our house, a woman. She's been trapped. I don't know how long. Please hurry." After he hung up, he stood in the kitchen, trying to process what he'd just seen. Someone had built that room, reinforced it, locked it. Someone had kept a human being in a cage beneath this house. And when that someone stopped coming, she'd been left to die in the dark. Roy thought about the last 2 weeks, living above her, sleeping peacefully while she was down there dying. The guilt was immediate and irrational, but it seized him anyway. Downstairs, Nina sat beside the woman, holding her hand, speaking softly. "Help is coming. You're going to be okay. We're going to get you out of here." The woman kept crying, kept touching Nina's hand like she couldn't quite believe it was real. "My name is Mara," she whispered. "My name is Mara." The ambulance arrived first, sirens cutting through the quiet afternoon. 2 paramedics, a man and a woman, followed Roy down to the sub-basement with equipment and a stretcher. The female paramedic, whose name tag read Patterson, took one look at Mara and immediately radioed for additional support. "Severe dehydration, malnutrition, possible hypothermia," she said into her radio. "Patient is conscious but disoriented. We need fluids started immediately." They worked quickly, assessing vital signs, wrapping Mara in thermal blankets, starting an IV line. Mara flinched at every touch but didn't resist. Her eyes stayed fixed on Nina, who'd moved to give the paramedics room but remained visible. "Don't leave," Mara whispered. "I'm right here," Nina promised. "I'm not going anywhere." Sheriff Doyle Hutchins arrived 10 minutes later, a heavy-set man in his mid-50s with a weather-worn face and skeptical eyes. He descended carefully into the sub-basement, surveyed the scene with an expression Roy couldn't read. "Roy Barrett?" he asked. "Yes, sir. My daughter Nina and I found her about 40 minutes ago." "And you just bought this property?" 2 weeks ago. "From the county. The previous owner died last fall." Hutchins nodded slowly, pulled out a notebook. "Eugene Fairmont. Heart attack in the grocery store parking lot. September 15th. He looked at Mara, being lifted carefully onto the stretcher. "Ma'am, can you tell me your name?" "Mara," she said, her voice slightly stronger with the IV fluids. "Mara Sutton. How long have you been down here, Miss Sutton?" "I don't know, months, 9 months maybe." I lost track. The paramedics began moving her toward the stairs. Hutchins followed them up, gesturing for Roy and Nina to come along. In the main cellar, he stopped them while the paramedics continued up to ground level. I need you both to give statements, he said. Walk me through exactly how you found her. Roy explained about the tapping, Nina discovering the false wall, breaking through to find the hidden room. Hutchins took notes, asked detailed questions about timing, what they'd touched, what they'd moved. His tone was professional, but held an edge Roy didn't like, as if they were suspects rather than rescuers. We're taking her to County General, Hutchins said. I'll need to seal this area as a crime scene. You'll need to stay out of the cellar until we've processed everything. Of course, Roy said. Whatever you need. Hutchins looked at them both carefully. Just so we're clear, neither of you had any knowledge of Miss Sutton's presence before today. No, Nina said sharply. We've been living here 2 weeks. We had no idea anyone was down there. Had to ask, Hutchins said, but his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. They went upstairs. The paramedics were loading Mara into the ambulance. Nina ran to the back doors before they closed.
Which hospital?
She called. County General. About 40 minutes north. We'll come check on you, Nina said to Mara. Mara's hand reached out, grasped Nina's briefly. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for hearing me. The ambulance pulled away, lights flashing. More vehicles arrived, 2 deputies, a crime scene van. Hutchins directed them to the cellar, then returned to Roy and Nina. I'll need formal statements from both of you. Can you come down to the station tomorrow morning? Of course, Roy said. After Hutchins left, they brought the deputies down to the hidden room. Roy and Nina sat on the porch, watching the official vehicles come and go, neither speaking. The afternoon had taken on a surreal quality. This morning they'd been renovating a house. Now it was a crime scene. Vernon the mailman drove by slowly, craning his neck to see what was happening. By evening, Roy suspected the whole town would know something had occurred at the Fairmont place. The investigators worked until dark. When they finally left, Hutchins approached the porch where Roy and Nina still sat. We've documented everything, he said. Found evidence of long-term habitation in that room. Water bottles, food wrappers, waste bucket. Looks like someone was keeping her supplied, at least until recently. He paused. Eugene Fairmont died 6 months ago. If Miss Sutton's timeline is accurate, she was down there when he had his heart attack. Roy felt sick. You mean she's been trapped down there alone since September? That's what it looks like. The room has a ventilation shaft. That's probably how she survived. But without regular food and water delivery. Hutchins shook his head. She's lucky you found her when you did. Another week or 2, and this would have been a different kind of scene. After the sheriff left, Roy and Nina sat in silence as darkness fell. Neither wanted to go inside. The house felt different now, contaminated by what they'd discovered. I keep thinking about the nights we've been here, Nina finally said. We were sleeping upstairs, watching TV, cooking dinner, and she was down there, dying. We didn't hear anything. The house is well built, Roy said. Sound doesn't carry, and she was deep below the regular cellar. Still, 2 weeks, Dad, we were right above her. But we found her. That's what matters. Nina turned to him, eyes bright with tears. What if we hadn't? What if I'd ignored the tapping, thought it was just pipes? What if we'd never gone down there? Roy had no answer. The randomness of it was staggering. How close Mara had come to dying. How easily she could have been left undiscovered. Eventually, someone would have bought the house, but when? Next month? Next year? Would there have been anything left to find? They slept poorly that night. Roy lay in his downstairs bedroom, staring at the ceiling, acutely aware of the cellar beneath him. Every sound made him tense. Around 3 in the morning, he heard Nina moving around upstairs, equally unable to rest. In the morning, they drove to the sheriff's station and gave formal statements. Hutchins recorded everything, asked them to walk through the discovery multiple times. He seemed less suspicious now, more focused on building a case against a dead man. Eugene Fairmont worked at the textile mill before it closed, Hutchins told them. After that, odd jobs, kept to himself mostly. Never married, no family. Lived in that house his whole life, inherited it from his father. Neighbors said he was strange but harmless. Guess they were wrong about the harmless part. After the statements, Roy and Nina drove to County General Hospital. The receptionist initially refused to give them any information, privacy laws, but Nina persisted, explaining they were the ones who'd found Mara, that she'd asked them to visit. Finally, a doctor came out to speak with them. She was young, with tired eyes and a no-nonsense manner. "Miss Sutton is severely malnourished and dehydrated," she said. "She has multiple infections, some dental issues, and significant psychological trauma. She's on IV fluids and antibiotics. We're monitoring her closely. Can we see her?" Nina asked. The doctor hesitated. "She's very weak, but she has been asking about you. Briefly, don't tire her out." They followed the doctor to a private room. Mara lay in the bed, connected to multiple monitors and IV lines. She looked even more fragile in the hospital lighting, her skin pale, dark circles under her eyes. But she was clean now, her hair washed, wearing a hospital gown. When she saw them, her face transformed. "You came." Nina moved to the bedside, took her hand carefully. "Of course we came." "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm dreaming," Mara said. Her voice was still weak but clearer than before. "I keep thinking I'll wake up back in that room." "You're safe now," Roy said from the doorway. "That's over." Mara's eyes filled with tears. "I thought I was going to die down there. After he stopped coming, I kept waiting. Days passed, then weeks. I rationed the last of the water, the crackers. When those ran out," she closed her eyes, "I tried to stay alive. I thought maybe someone would notice I was gone. File a report. Search for me." But no one came. "Did you know Eugene Fairmont?" Nina asked gently. Mara nodded weakly. "My car broke down. Outside town about a year ago. He stopped, offered to help. Seemed kind. He said he could fix it at his place just down the road. I was stupid. I trusted him." "That's not stupid," Nina said firmly. "That's being a decent person who expects decency from others." "He drugged me," Mara continued. "Something in the coffee he gave me. When I woke up, I was in that room. He said no one would look for me, that I was invisible, that he was saving me from something worse." She opened her eyes, looked at Roy. "Was I? Invisible, I mean. Did anyone look?" Roy didn't know how to answer that. 3 days after they found her, Mara was stable enough to give a preliminary statement to Sheriff Hutchins. Roy and Nina visited daily, bringing small things the hospital staff said might comfort her. Soft socks, a warm blanket, magazines. Mara seemed to draw strength from their presence, her voice growing steadier each visit. On the 4th day, she told them her full story. "I was 33, she began, sitting up in the hospital bed with pillows supporting her back. Traveling cross-country, taking my time. I'd quit my job in Ohio, was driving to Seattle to stay with friends. Thought I'd see the country. Clear my head after a bad breakup." Nina sat in the chair beside the bed, listening. Roy stood by the window, arms crossed, jaw tight. "My car started making noises outside Granger Falls. I pulled into a gas station, asked if there was a mechanic nearby. The attendant said most places were closed, but Eugene sometimes helped people out. Gave me directions to his house." She paused, took a sip of water. Her hands still trembled slightly. He was so normal. "That's what I remember most. He smiled, said he'd take a look. Invited me inside while he got his tools. The house seemed ordinary, old but clean. He made coffee. We talked about where I was heading. He seemed lonely, harmless. Then everything went fuzzy." "The coffee," Nina said softly. "I woke up in that room. Concrete walls, one door, locked from the outside. A bucket in the corner, a mattress, some bottles of water." I screamed until my throat was raw. "Pounded on the walls until my hands bled. Nothing, no one heard." Roy turned from the window. "How often did he come?" "Every few days at first. He'd bring food, water, empty the bucket. He talked to me like we were friends, like I'd chosen to be there. He said the world was dangerous, that he was protecting me, that people like me, people passing through, disconnected, were vulnerable. He was saving me from something worse." The delusion in that logic made Roy's stomach turn. "Did he hurt you? Beyond the captivity?" "Not physically, not the way you mean. But being in that room day after day, never knowing if he'd come back, if that day would be the last time I'd eat or drink. That's its own kind of violence." She looked at her hands. After months, I stopped fighting. Started talking back when he visited, pretending to agree with him. I thought maybe if he believed I was grateful, he'd let me out. But he never did. When did he stop coming? Nina asked. I'm not sure exactly. I'd lost track of time. But one day he just didn't show up. Then another day. Then another. At first, I thought it was a test. Then I thought maybe he'd abandoned me, decided I wasn't worth the trouble. I didn't know he'd died until you told me. She was quiet for a moment, staring at the window where afternoon light streamed through. The worst part was knowing I'd filed a missing person report. The day my car broke down, before I met Eugene, I'd called my sister Bridget, told her where I was, that I'd call again when I got to Seattle. When I didn't, she filed a report. I know she did because Eugene told me. He showed me a printout from some website, laughing about how it didn't matter. Said nobody actually looked for adults who disappeared. We're just statistics. Roy felt anger rising in his chest. Did you tell Sheriff Hutchins this? Yes. He said the report was filed in the next county, different jurisdiction. Eugene wasn't on anyone's radar. His house seemed empty to people passing by. He always kept me quiet when anyone was around. And after a few months, I guess people stopped looking. After the visit, Roy and Nina drove to the town hall, a small brick building that also housed the library and community center. Inside, a bulletin board covered one wall, layered with announcements, flyers, and notices. They searched methodically, peeling back newer postings. Near the bottom, barely visible, they found it. A missing person flyer with Mara's photo. She looked younger, healthier, smiling at the camera. The date was stamped at the top, April of the previous year. 15 months ago. Nina carefully unpinned it, took it down. The paper was faded, coffee-stained, forgotten beneath layers of bake sale announcements and lost pet posters. They drove directly to the sheriff's station. Hutchins was at his desk reviewing paperwork. He looked up when they entered, his expression wary. Roy placed the flyer on his desk. This was buried on the town hall bulletin board. Mara's missing person report from 15 months ago. Hutchins picked it up, studied it. Different county filed this. We would have received notification, but without a local connection. Eugene Fairmont wasn't a local connection. Nina's voice was sharp. A woman goes missing in the area, and the guy who lives on the outskirts isn't worth a conversation. Ms. Barrett, I understand you're upset. Do you? Nina leaned forward. Because I'm trying to understand how someone can file a report, how her face can be posted publicly, and she still ends up trapped in a basement for over a year while everyone goes about their business. Hutchins's face reddened. We process dozens of missing person reports. Most adults leave voluntarily. We can't investigate every single person in town every time someone doesn't check in with their family. Maybe you should, Roy said quietly. Maybe that's exactly what you should do. After they left, Nina was still fuming. They sat in Roy's truck in the parking lot, neither moving to start the engine. It's not just Hutchins, Nina said finally. It's the system. She fell through every crack there is. Filed a report, check. Posted flyers, check. But nobody connected the dots. Nobody cared enough to look harder. They should have, Roy agreed. But I'm not sure anger fixes it. That evening, Nina began researching Eugene Fairmont online. The internet had limited information, no social media presence, no professional profiles. But she found a few mentions in local newspaper archives. Eugene had worked at the textile mill for 30 years before it closed. A brief article about the closure included a photo of workers. Eugene stood in the back row, unsmiling, eyes downcast. She found his father's obituary from 1998. Clayton Fairmont, survived by his son Eugene. Clayton had worked at the same mill, lived in the same house. The obituary was brief, impersonal. Digging deeper, Nina found something that made her stop. A newspaper article from 1976, buried in the archives. A young woman named Patricia Vaughn had filed charges against Clayton Fairmont, claiming he'd held her against her will. The case was dismissed 6 months later. Insufficient evidence. Victim declined to testify. Nina printed the article, brought it to Roy. They read it together in the kitchen of the house that had held Mara prisoner. It's a pattern, Nina said, father to son. How many others were there? We don't know. There were others. But we don't know there weren't. Roy thought about the hidden room, the careful construction, the reinforced walls. Someone had built that space with planning and intent. How long had it been there? Had Eugene inherited more than just the house from his father? The next day, they brought their findings to Hutchins. He listened, took notes, but his expression suggested skepticism. "I'll look into the old case," he said. But that was almost 50 years ago, different sheriff, different time. Without more evidence? "There's a room built specifically to hold people prisoner," Nina interrupted. "How much more evidence do you need?" "I meant evidence of other victims. So unless we find bodies, you're not interested." Hutchins stood, his patience clearly thinning. "I'm interested in facts, Miss Barrett. Eugene Fairmont is dead. He can't be prosecuted. Mara Sutton is safe. I understand you want answers, but sometimes there aren't any to find." Outside the station, Nina kicked at the gravel parking lot. "He doesn't want to dig deeper, doesn't want to find out how badly the system failed." Roy put a hand on her shoulder. "Maybe, but we can't force him to care. What we can do is help Mara." 2 weeks after they found her, Mara was released from the hospital. The doctors wanted her to stay longer, but insurance limitations and bureaucratic realities cut the stay short. She was stable, physically recovering, but nowhere near healed. The hospital social worker, a harried woman named Gretchen, presented limited options. "There's a shelter in Riverside County, about 3 hours south," Gretchen said, reviewing paperwork. "They have a bed available, can accommodate you for up to 30 days while you figure out next steps." 3 hours away? Mara's voice was small. "I don't have a car. No money for gas. There's a bus that runs twice weekly. We can get you a voucher." Roy and Nina sat in on the meeting, having become Mara's de facto advocates. Roy watched Mara's face as Gretchen described the shelter. Overcrowded, shared rooms, strict curfews. Mara's hands twisted in her lap, her breathing shallow. The thought of another institutional space, more confinement, was clearly overwhelming her. "What about staying local?" Nina asked. "Are there resources in Granger Falls?" Gretchen shook her head. "Town that size doesn't have dedicated services. County assistance would still route her to Riverside or similar facilities." Roy heard himself speak before he'd fully thought it through. "She can stay with us." Everyone turned to look at him. Nina's eyes widened. Mara's filled with tears. Gretchen frowned. "Mr. Barrett, while that's generous, I should caution that Ms. Sutton needs professional support, which she can access from our place just as easily as from a shelter 3 hours away," Roy said. "We have space. The house is familiar to her already in a strange way. And Nina and I are here, not strangers." "Dad," Nina said carefully, "can we talk outside?" In the hallway, Nina spoke quietly but urgently. "Are you sure about this? Having her live with us? In that house? Where else is she going to go? You heard the options. Overcrowded shelter, no support system, completely alone." Roy leaned against the wall. "We have a spare room. We're already invested in her recovery. Why wouldn't we help?" "Because it's complicated. Because the house is where it happened. Because we barely know her. We know enough. We know she needs help and has nowhere else to turn. Isn't that enough?" Nina was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Okay, but we make it clear. It's temporary until she gets on her feet. And we set up boundaries, make sure she has space and privacy." They returned to the room. Gretchen was explaining government assistance programs to Mara, who looked overwhelmed by the forms and requirements. "If the offer still stands," Nina said, "we'd be happy to have you stay with us temporarily, just until you figure things out." Mara looked between them, disbelief and hope warring on her face. "You do that? After everything?" "After everything is exactly why," Roy said. 3 days later, they brought Mara home. Roy had cleaned and prepared the upstairs bedroom across from Nina's. Fresh paint, new curtains, a comfortable bed. They deliberately made it bright and open. Windows that locked from the inside, a door that opened easily, nothing that could feel like confinement. Mara stood in the doorway, taking it in. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Nina said. "Just rest, recover, take your time." The first few days were difficult. Mara was jumpy, startled by sudden noises. She struggled with the house itself. Walking past the kitchen made her tense, knowing the cellar entrance was there. At night, they could hear her pacing, unable to sleep. Roy had offered to seal the cellar entrance permanently, but Mara said that wouldn't help. The knowledge of what was below would remain. Sheriff Hutchins returned one afternoon with a cardboard box. "Personal effects from the crime scene," he said, handing it to Roy. "We've finished processing. Thought Miss Sutton might want these." Inside were items from the hidden room. Mara's wallet, her phone long dead, some clothes, a few personal items she'd had when she was taken. There was also a small notebook, worn and water-stained. Hutchins pulled it out separately. "Found this hidden behind the furnace in the main cellar. Appears to be Eugene Fairmont's journal." Roy opened it carefully. The handwriting was neat, controlled. He read a few lines and felt his stomach turn. "Can we keep this?" he asked. "It's evidence, but we've documented everything. I figured you folks might want to understand what happened." Hutchins paused. "There are some disturbing passages. He writes about Miss Sutton like she was a guest. Refers to helping her, protecting her. Man was deeply delusional." After Hutchins left, Roy showed the journal to Nina. They sat at the kitchen table reading through entries that documented Eugene's twisted logic. He wrote about his loneliness, his conviction that certain people were vulnerable and needed his protection. He described Mara's arrival as providence, a chance to save someone. Most chillingly, there were references to others. Vague mentions of previous visitors who'd moved on or found peace. No names, no details, but the implication was clear. "We need to push the state investigators," Nina said. "If there were others, their families deserved to know." Roy called the state police, explained what they'd found. The investigator, a woman named Keller, listened carefully. "We're already looking into it," she said. "Property records show Eugene owned 2 other houses over the years, both sold decades ago. We're trying to locate them, see if we can search the properties. But without specific names or dates, it's difficult. The journal mentions a woman from the late 90s, Roy said, flipping through pages. Says she went to a better place after 6 months. That could mean anything. Or nothing. We'll investigate, Mr. Barrett, but I want to manage your expectations. This may not lead anywhere concrete." Meanwhile, Mara began the bureaucratic nightmare of rebuilding her identity. Her driver's license had expired during her captivity. Her bank accounts were closed due to inactivity. She had no current address, no employment, no credit history from the past year. Every system required documentation she didn't have, and getting new documentation required proof from systems that no longer recognized her existence. Nina helped her navigate the phone trees and forms. They spent hours on hold with Social Security, the DMV, various state agencies. Each conversation required Mara to explain her situation, to relive her trauma for strangers who responded with varying degrees of compassion or bureaucratic indifference. During one particularly frustrating call, the 3rd time being transferred, the 4th time explaining why her ID had lapsed, Mara broke down. She hung up the phone and put her head in her hands, shoulders shaking. "I can't do this," she said. "It's too much. I don't exist anymore. I'm just a problem that doesn't fit into any of their forms." Roy sat down across from her. He didn't offer empty reassurance. Instead, he told her about his own experience after losing his job, the rejection letters, the interviews where he could see them dismiss him based on age, the apartment applications that went nowhere, the credit checks that failed. "I know it's not the same," he said, "but I understand what it feels like to be invisible. To have the world tell you that you don't matter, that you're not worth the effort. It's why I was living in my truck when Nina found me." Mara looked up. "I didn't know that. Most people don't. Shame is a powerful thing. Makes us hide our struggles, pretend we're fine." He leaned forward. "But here's what I learned. You keep going anyway. Not because it gets easier, but because giving up means they win. The systems that failed you, the indifference that let you fall through the cracks, they only win if you stop fighting." That evening, the 3 of them shared dinner together. Simple food, pasta, salad, bread. They ate slowly, talked about small things. Mara told them about her life before, her work as a veterinary technician, her love of hiking, the road trip that had gone so wrong. For the first time since she'd been freed, she laughed, a small sound, but genuine. 3 weeks into their unconventional household arrangement, a breakthrough came from an unexpected source. The state investigators managed to retrieve Mara's old cell phone from evidence and charged it. The battery, surprisingly, still held enough life to power on. Nina sat with Mara at the kitchen table as the phone slowly came to life. The screen illuminated, showing dozens of missed calls, text messages, voicemails, all from the early days after Mara's disappearance. Then gradually the messages had stopped. "Do you want to listen to them?" Nina asked gently. Mara's hand hovered over the phone, trembling. "I'm afraid to. We can do it together. Or I can listen first, tell you what's there." "No, I need to hear." Mara picked up the phone, navigated to voicemails, pressed play. The first message was from her sister Bridget. "Hey, it's me. Just checking in. You said you'd call when you got to Seattle. Let me know you made it safe." The next message, 2 days later, had an edge of worry. "Mara, I'm starting to get concerned. Call me back, please." Then more messages, the tone shifting from concern to frustration to anger. "I don't know what's going on with you, but this silent treatment is childish. We had a fight, so what? That doesn't mean you disappear on everyone who cares about you." After 3 weeks, the messages took on a bitter quality. "Fine. If you want to cut us out of your life, that's your choice. I tried. I filed a missing person report, did everything I could. But apparently, you just don't want to be found. I can't keep doing this." The final message was from 2 months after Mara's disappearance. Bridget's voice was flat, exhausted. "I don't know if you'll ever hear this. The police say there's nothing more they can do. You're an adult. You have the right to disappear if you want. Mom thinks you're dead. Dad won't talk about it. I'm trying to move on, but I need you to know I didn't give up on you. The world did. I'm sorry I couldn't do more." Then silence. No more messages. The phone had eventually died, and with it, the last connection to her old life. Mara sat motionless, tears streaming down her face. Nina reached for her hand, but Mara pulled away, stood abruptly, and walked to the window. "She thought I abandoned her." "They all did. My family spent months thinking I just didn't care enough to call." "They didn't know," Nina said. "They couldn't have known, but they should have." "Bridget knew me. She knew I wouldn't just vanish, but it was easier to believe I was selfish than to keep looking." Mara's voice cracked. "How do I call her now? How do I explain that I wasn't ghosting her? I was locked in a basement screaming for help." "You tell her the truth. You let her know you never stopped wanting to come home." It took Mara 3 days to work up the courage to make the call. When she finally did, Nina and Roy gave her privacy, retreating to the porch. They heard Mara's voice through the open window, tentative at first, then breaking into sobs, then talking rapidly, words tumbling over each other. An hour later, Mara came outside. Her eyes were red, but her face held something new. Relief, maybe, or hope. "She's coming to visit," Mara said. "In 2 weeks." She was shocked, couldn't believe it was really me. She thought it was some kind of cruel prank at first. Mara sat on the porch steps. She cried. We both cried. She kept saying she was sorry for giving up, and I kept saying she had nothing to be sorry for. "That's good," Roy said. "That's really good, Mara. She wants me to come stay with her in Ohio, says she'll help me get back on my feet, find work, rebuild." Mara looked at the house. "I told her I needed to stay here a little longer, finish what I started. Does that make sense?" "It does," Nina said. While Mara navigated her reconnection with family, Roy faced his own struggles with visibility and value. His unemployment benefits were running out. Despite dozens of applications, he'd received nothing but rejection letters or silence. At 59, he was too old for entry-level positions and too expensive for anything else. The money from his severance was nearly gone. Nina's freelance income kept them afloat, but barely. The house still needed major repairs they couldn't afford. One afternoon, Roy was at Crane Hardware buying supplies for a minor fix when Phyllis approached him at the register. "Heard you're handy with repairs," she said. "I get by. My back porch is rotting. Been meaning to fix it for years, but never got around to it. You interested in taking a look? I can pay cash, nothing fancy but honest work." Roy accepted. The job took 3 days, and Phyllis was pleased with the result. She mentioned his work to a neighbor, who called about a leaking roof. That job led to another, then another. Within 2 weeks, Roy had steady handyman work. Small jobs, modest pay, but something. It wasn't the career he'd lost, but it was work that mattered. People saw the results immediately, thanked him genuinely. At the factory, he'd been employee number 2847, replaceable and eventually replaced. Here he was Roy Barrett, the man who fixed Mrs. Patterson's front steps, who restored the church's stained glass window frame. Still, the town's response to their household situation was mixed. Some people were supportive, brought casseroles and offered help. Others whispered. Roy overheard conversations at the hardware store. Speculation about whether he and Nina had known about Mara all along, whether they were profiting somehow from the publicity. The worst came one Saturday afternoon. Roy was loading supplies into his truck when a man approached. Someone Roy vaguely recognized from town, though they'd never spoken. "You're the one who bought the Fairmont place," the man said. It wasn't a question. "That's right. Got yourself a real attraction there, huh? Woman in the basement, news crews, the whole spectacle. Bet property values went up, everybody wanting to see the House of Horrors." Roy carefully set down the lumber he was holding. "I don't know what you think you know, but I know opportunism when I see it. That poor woman gets locked up, you profit from it. Probably planning to sell the story to some true crime show. You need to walk away now. Or what? You gonna make me?" Tough guy swoops in, plays hero, gets famous off someone else's trauma. Nina appeared from the store entrance, carrying paint cans. She must have seen the confrontation through the window, because her expression was fierce. "My father saved that woman's life," she said, her voice cold and controlled. "We gave her a place to stay when no one else would. We're helping her rebuild her life, while people like you stand around making accusations. So unless you have something useful to contribute, I suggest you move along." The man's face reddened. "Just saying what everyone's thinking. Then everyone's wrong." Nina moved to stand beside Roy. "And if you want to spread gossip about us, at least get your facts straight first." The man left, muttering. Roy and Nina finished loading the truck in silence. As they drove home, Nina spoke. "Does it bother you?" "What people say?" "Some," Roy admitted. "But I've been invisible for a year." Being visible, even with gossip attached, is still better than not mattering at all. That evening, Mara overheard Roy and Nina discussing the confrontation. She found them in the kitchen, looking tired. "This is because of me," she said. "The rumors, the suspicion. I'm making your lives harder." "No," Roy said firmly. "You're not responsible for other people's small-mindedness. But if I wasn't here, if you weren't here, we'd just be two people fixing up a house. Now we're a family helping each other survive. That's not a burden, Mara. That's the best thing that's happened to me in years." Nina nodded agreement. "You gave us purpose, something bigger than our own problems. Don't apologize for that." Mara's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "You don't repay family," Roy said. "You just pay it forward." 1 month after Mara's rescue, Sheriff Hutchins returned with news that changed everything. He arrived in the late afternoon, his expression grim, carrying a folder thick with documents. "We need to talk," he said. "All 3 of you." They gathered in the living room, the space they'd turned into something approaching comfortable despite its history. Hutchins sat in the armchair, opened the folder, and pulled out several photocopied reports. "State investigators have been cross-referencing missing persons cases with Eugene Fairmont's timeline and movements," he began. "They found connections to 2 other cases. Both women, both reported missing while passing through this region. Both cases went cold years ago." Mara's hand found Nina's. Roy leaned forward. "The first was in 2010. Woman named Linda Pacheco, age 28, traveling from California to New York. Last confirmed sighting was at a gas station 15 miles from here. She called her boyfriend that morning, said she'd be in Pennsylvania by evening. Never arrived. Never used her credit cards again. Never contacted anyone." Hutchins pulled out a photo, a smiling woman with dark hair, bright eyes, her whole life ahead of her. The second was 2014. Jennifer Solis, 31, truck driver, disappeared during a route through this area. Her truck was found abandoned at a rest stop. No signs of struggle, no explanation. Search turned up nothing. He laid out both photos on the coffee table. Two women who'd simply vanished. Eugene Fairmont was interviewed in the Pacheco case, Hutchins continued. He'd been at the same gas station that morning. Security footage showed him in the background. Deputies talked to him. He said he didn't remember seeing her. No reason to suspect him further. The Solis case, he wasn't even on the radar. But now you think he took them, Nina said. We think it's possible. More than possible. Hutchins pulled out another document. Investigators have been digging into Eugene's property history. He owned two other houses before this one. Both were sold years ago, one in 2008, another in 2015. We've located both properties and requested permission to search them. Roy felt cold spreading through his chest. You think you'll find remains? We're preparing for that possibility. Mara stood abruptly, walked to the window. Her breathing had quickened. Nina followed, stood beside her. Why did I survive? Mara asked, her voice tight. If he did this to others, why am I alive? Timing, Hutchins said bluntly. He died before he could finish whatever his pattern was. You survived by accident. The words hung in the air, brutal in their honesty. Mara wrapped her arms around herself, and Nina put a hand on her shoulder. Roy's mind was working through the implications. If there were multiple victims over years, that means people knew or suspected. Multiple missing persons reports in the same region, all similar circumstances. Someone should have connected the pattern. Different jurisdictions, different investigators, years apart, Hutchins said. But his tone was defensive. Hindsight makes it seem obvious, but at the time, it was easier not to look, Roy said. Easier to mark them as runaways, voluntary disappearances, adults exercising their right to vanish. Hutchins didn't argue. The silence was its own admission. That evening, after Hutchins left, Roy couldn't settle. He went to his laptop, started searching property records. The house they lived in had been in the Fairmont family since 1952. Eugene had inherited it from his father, Clayton, who died in 1998. Roy dug deeper, searching newspaper archives for Clayton's name. He found the obituary Nina had discovered weeks earlier, then kept searching. An hour into his research, he found something that made him call Nina over. Look at this, he said, pointing at the screen. It was a newspaper article from 1976. The headline read, "Local man cleared in detention case." The article described how Clayton Fairmont had been accused by a woman named Patricia Vaughn of holding her against her will. She claimed he'd imprisoned her in his home for 3 weeks after offering her shelter when her car broke down. The charges were ultimately dismissed. Patricia declined to testify, and without her cooperation, prosecutors couldn't proceed. The exact same method, Nina said. Car breaks down, he offers help, traps them. Roy found another article from 1977, an interview with Patricia Vaughn conducted by a journalist who'd followed up on the case. In it, Patricia explained why she'd dropped the charges. Everyone in town knew Clayton, she was quoted saying. He was a pillar of the community, worked at the mill for 30 years, went to church every Sunday. When I tried to press charges, people looked at me like I was crazy, like I'd made it up for attention. His lawyer tore me apart in depositions, suggested I was a prostitute, a drug addict, anything to discredit me. Eventually, I just couldn't keep fighting. I left town and tried to forget. Roy printed the articles, spread them on the table. The pattern was undeniable. Clayton had done this in the 70s. Eugene had inherited more than just property. He'd inherited a method, a delusion, perhaps even a space specifically designed for this purpose. We need to find out more about Clayton, Roy said. See if there were other accusations, other women who disappeared in the 70s and 80s. They worked late into the night, searching archives, cross-referencing names and dates. By morning, they'd found 3 more cases from the 70s, women who'd gone missing in the region, cases that had gone cold, been marked as runaways or presumed deceased. When Roy presented their findings to the state investigators, Detective Keller listened carefully, took notes, but her expression remained guarded. This is helpful background, she said. But these cases are 50 years old. Physical evidence will be nearly impossible to find. Witnesses are likely deceased or unreliable. Even if we could prove Clayton Fairmont was involved, he's been dead for over 20 years. But it establishes a pattern, Nina argued. It shows this wasn't just Eugene acting alone. It was generational. The community protected Clayton, which enabled Eugene. How many women disappeared because people chose not to see what was happening? Keller didn't answer immediately. Finally, she said, "I'll include this in our investigation. But I need you to prepare for the possibility that we'll never have complete answers. Some crimes, especially ones this old, remain unsolved." That night, Mara asked to see the articles about Clayton and the women who'd disappeared. She read them silently, her face growing paler with each page. "There could have been a dozen of us," she said finally. "A dozen women over 50 years, and the town just looked the other way because it was easier than confronting what was happening." "The town failed," Roy said. "The system failed. But you're here now. You survived. That has to mean something." Mara looked at him, her eyes fierce despite the tears. "It means I have to speak up. Not just about what happened to me, but about all of them. The ones who didn't survive, who were dismissed, ignored, erased. Someone has to make people see." "That's a heavy burden," Nina said gently. "So is staying silent." Mara's jaw was set, determined. "I've been invisible once. I won't be invisible again." The next morning, Mara contacted a regional news station. A journalist named Beverly Moss had been following the story, had reached out multiple times, requesting an interview. Until now, Mara had refused. But looking at the faces of Linda Pacheco and Jennifer Solis, thinking about Patricia Vaughn and the unnamed women from Clayton's era, she knew what she had to do. She agreed to a televised interview, not just about her captivity, but about the systemic failures that had enabled 2 generations of predators. She wanted to name the women who'd been forgotten, to force the community to reckon with its complicity. When she told Roy and Nina her decision, they didn't try to talk her out of it. "Are you sure?" Roy asked. "Once you do this, there's no taking it back. Your face, your story, it'll be public forever." "I'm sure," Mara said. "I was silent for 9 months because I had no choice. Now I have a voice. I'm going to use it." The interview was scheduled for Friday afternoon, 1 week away. Beverly Moss came to the house on Monday to prepare. A professional woman in her mid-40s with kind eyes and a direct manner that Mara appreciated. "I want to be clear about what this will involve," Beverly said, sitting across from Mara in the living room. "We'll discuss your abduction, your captivity, the rescue. But I also understand you want to talk about the broader patterns, the other victims. Is that correct?" "Yes," Mara said. "This isn't just my story. It's Linda's story, Jennifer's story, Patricia's story. All the women who were dismissed or forgotten. That's important context and we'll include it. But I need to warn you, this will be difficult. You'll have to relive traumatic experiences on camera. People will have opinions, some supportive, others not. Are you prepared for that?" Mara glanced at Roy and Nina, who sat on either side of her. "I'm prepared." They spent 2 hours going through potential questions. Beverly was thorough but sensitive, never pushing when Mara needed a moment to collect herself. They discussed how much detail to include, what would serve the story versus what would simply be sensational. "We want truth, not exploitation," Beverly said. "The goal is accountability and change, not ratings through suffering." After Beverly left, Mara practiced her statement with Nina and Roy. She wrote down key points she wanted to make, rehearsed responses to difficult questions. Some nights, she'd wake from nightmares and find them both already awake, ready to sit with her until the fear subsided. On Wednesday, Sheriff Hutchins called Roy. "I'm asking you to reconsider this interview," Hutchins said. "It could interfere with the ongoing investigation. If Mara makes certain claims publicly before we have evidence." "She's only going to state facts," Roy interrupted. "Her own experience and documented missing persons cases. She's not making accusations that aren't supported by evidence. The optics are bad. Makes it look like the department didn't do its job. Maybe because the department didn't do its job," Roy said evenly. "That's not Mara's problem to solve." Hutchins was silent for a moment. "I'm trying to do right by this case, Barrett, but you're making it harder. Then do better. Find out what happened to Linda and Jennifer." Give their families answers. That's how you make this right, not by silencing the one woman who survived. On Thursday afternoon, Bridget arrived from Ohio. She and Mara had spoken on the phone multiple times, but seeing each other in person was different. They stood in the driveway for a long moment. Then Bridget dropped her bags and embraced her sister, both of them crying. Roy and Nina gave them space, busying themselves with dinner preparations while the sisters reconnected in the living room. Their voices drifted through the house, laughter mixed with tears, catching up on 15 months of lost time. Later, over dinner, Bridget shared what the family had gone through. Their mother had convinced herself Mara was dead within the first 3 months. Their father had thrown himself into work, refusing to discuss it. Bridget had kept searching, calling hospitals and police departments across the country, checking Jane Doe reports, never quite able to accept that Mara was simply gone. "I should have pushed harder," Bridget said, her voice tight with guilt. "Should have demanded they do more, search more, look harder. You filed the report," Mara said. "You did everything you could. The system failed, not you. Still, I gave up eventually. Stopped checking, stopped calling. I convinced myself you'd chosen to disappear because that hurt less than the alternatives." Mara reached across the table, took her sister's hand. "I don't blame you. I never blamed you. The only person responsible is the man who locked me in that room." That night, Roy received an unexpected phone call. It was a job offer, a position at a manufacturing plant 2 hours north, decent pay, full benefits. The kind of stable employment he'd been desperately seeking for months. "When would you need an answer?" Roy asked. "We'd like you to start in 2 weeks. I know it's quick, but we need someone with your experience." After he hung up, Roy sat in his room, considering. The income would solve their financial problems. He could afford proper repairs on the house, help Mara get fully back on her feet, ease the burden on Nina. It was exactly what he'd been hoping for. But it would also mean leaving. Early mornings, long commutes, or possibly having to find a place closer to the plant. He'd miss dinners with Nina and Mara, the quiet evenings on the porch, the sense of family they'd built. He went upstairs, found Nina working on a design project in her room. "I got a job offer," he said, and explained the details. Nina's face lit up. "Dad, that's wonderful. You should absolutely take it. It would mean being gone most of the time. Long commute or relocating temporarily, we'll manage. Mara and I can handle things here. This is what you've been working toward, is it?" Roy sat on the edge of her bed. "A year ago, yes. This would have been everything I wanted. But now I'm not sure it is." "What do you mean?" "The handyman work isn't making us rich, but it's enough. More importantly, I'm here, present, part of something that matters. If I take this job, I go back to being employee number whatever, replaceable, invisible again. You need financial security. I need purpose," Roy corrected. "And I found it here with you and Mara. Maybe that's worth more than a salary." Nina was quiet for a moment. "Are you sure?" "Because we'd support whatever you decide. I'm sure." The next morning, Roy called the plant back and declined the offer. The hiring manager sounded surprised, tried to sweeten the deal, but Roy's mind was made up. He'd been invisible long enough. Here, in this house with these people, he was seen. He mattered. That wasn't something he was willing to trade. Friday morning arrived with unseasonably warm weather. The news crew was scheduled to arrive at 2. Mara spent the morning preparing, going over her notes, practicing breathing exercises to manage anxiety. Around noon, they found an envelope tucked under the windshield wiper of Roy's truck. Inside was a handwritten note, block letters, anonymous. "Keep your mouth shut or you'll regret it. This town takes care of its own." Roy brought it inside, showed it to the others. Nina wanted to call the police immediately, but Mara was strangely calm. "I expected this," she said. "Not everyone wants the truth to come out. Some people prefer comfortable lies." "We should postpone," Roy said. "If someone's threatening you, then they've already lost," Mara interrupted. "Because I'm not backing down. They can threaten, they can try to silence me, but I've spent 9 months in silence. I'm done with that." Roy called Hutchins anyway, reported the threat. The sheriff promised to have a deputy nearby during the interview. though his tone suggested he viewed it as an overreaction. They installed the security cameras Roy had been meaning to set up, checked all the locks, made sure the house was secure. Nina stayed close to Mara, providing silent support. At 1:30, Beverly Moss arrived with her crew. They set up lights and cameras in the living room, positioning Mara in a chair with soft lighting, creating an atmosphere of intimacy rather than interrogation. "Last chance to back out," Beverly said gently. "No judgment if you do." Mara looked at Roy and Nina, then at her sister. All of them nodded. "I'm ready," Mara said. At 2 o'clock, the cameras began rolling. The red light on the camera blinked on. Beverly Moss sat across from Mara, her expression warm but professional. Roy, Nina, and Bridget stood just off camera, close enough for Mara to feel their presence. "Thank you for agreeing to speak with us," Beverly began. "Can you start by telling us who you were before last April?" Mara took a breath, steadied herself. "I was 33 years old. I worked as a veterinary technician in Ohio. I loved hiking, photography, traveling. I just ended a long relationship and decided to take time for myself, drive cross-country to visit friends in Seattle. I wanted to see the country, clear my head, figure out what came next. What happened when you reached this area? My car started making noises outside Granger Falls. I pulled into a gas station, asked about mechanics. Someone gave me directions to a man named Eugene Fairmont, who sometimes helped people. I drove to his house. He seemed kind, offered to look at my car. While he gathered tools, he invited me inside, made coffee. We talked. He seemed lonely, but harmless. Mara's hands tightened in her lap, but her voice remained steady. The coffee was drugged. I woke up in a sealed room beneath his house. Concrete walls, one locked door, a bucket in the corner. I screamed until I couldn't scream anymore. I pounded the walls until my hands bled. No one came. Beverly leaned forward slightly. "How often did Eugene visit?" "Every few days at first. He'd bring food, water, empty the waste bucket. He talked to me like we were friends, like I'd chosen to be there. He said the world was dangerous, that people like me were vulnerable, that he was protecting me." Mara's voice wavered but didn't break. "He truly believed he was helping me. That's what made it so terrifying. He wasn't cruel in his mind. He was saving me." "How long were you held?" 9 months. Then one day he just stopped coming. I didn't know why. Days turned into weeks. I rationed the last of the water, the crackers. When those ran out, I survived on water from a leaking pipe in the corner. I kept banging on the walls with a piece of metal, hoping someone would hear. I thought I was going to die down there. "You didn't know Eugene had passed away?" "Not until Roy and Nina told me. He'd had a heart attack 6 months before they found me. I'd been alone in that room in the dark for half a year, just waiting, hoping." Beverly glanced at her notes. "You filed a missing person report before you were taken. Can you talk about that?" "The morning my car broke down, I called my sister Bridget, told her where I was, that I'd call again from Seattle. When I didn't, she filed a report. I know she did because Eugene showed me a printout of it. He laughed about how it didn't matter, how nobody actually looked for adults who disappeared." Mara's eyes filled with tears. He was right. The report was filed in a different county, different jurisdiction. Eugene wasn't on anyone's radar. And after a few months, people stopped looking. They assumed I'd left voluntarily. How did that make you feel? Invisible, forgotten, like I didn't matter enough for anyone to keep searching. Mara wiped her eyes. But the worst part was knowing my family thought I'd abandoned them. My sister, my parents, they believed I'd just chosen to disappear, that I didn't care enough to call. Beverly turned slightly toward the camera. "What viewers should know is that Mara's case isn't isolated. Investigators have connected Eugene Fairmont to at least 2 other missing persons cases from previous years. Linda Pacheco, who disappeared in 2010, and Jennifer Solis, who vanished in 2014. Both cases went cold. Both women were passing through this area when they disappeared." Mara nodded. "When I learned about Linda and Jennifer, I felt this overwhelming guilt. Why did I survive when they likely didn't? The only reason I'm alive is because Eugene died before he could finish whatever he'd planned for me. I survived by accident. What do you want people to understand about what happened to you?" Mara was quiet for a moment, gathering her thoughts. I want people to understand how easy it is to disappear. I filed a report. My face was on flyers. I had family looking for me. But I still fell through every crack in the system because it was easier to assume I'd left voluntarily than to investigate deeply. We're only as safe as the most forgotten among us. When we allow vulnerable people to become invisible, when we choose convenience over thoroughness, this is what happens. Roy spoke up for the first time, Beverly gesturing for him to join the frame. Can you describe what you found when you discovered Mara? Roy moved into camera view, sat beside Mara. We'd been in the house 2 weeks. My daughter Nina heard tapping from below the kitchen. We investigated, found a false wall in the cellar hiding a door. Behind that, stairs leading down to a sub-basement we didn't know existed. At the bottom was another locked door. When we opened it, Mara was inside, barely alive. The room was maybe 8 by 10 feet. Reinforced walls, 1 bucket, some empty water bottles. It was built to hold someone. What went through your mind? Horror, disbelief, then anger at how long she'd been there while the world went on above her. We'd been living in that house, sleeping, eating, renovating, and she was dying beneath us. The randomness of it haunted me. If Nina hadn't heard the tapping that specific day, if we'd been out running errands, Mara would still be down there. Or more likely, she'd be dead. Beverly turned back to Mara. What's your message to other communities, other law enforcement agencies? Mara looked directly into the camera, her voice strong despite the tears. Listen when people go missing. Don't assume. Don't dismiss. Don't accept the easiest explanation. Someone filed a report about me. My face was posted publicly. But because I was an adult, because I had no local ties, because it required effort to investigate, I became a statistic instead of a priority. She paused. Linda Pacheco had family searching for her. Jennifer Solis had an employer looking for her. Patricia Vaughn tried to press charges decades ago and was dismissed. How many others were there? How many women became invisible because it was easier than doing the hard work of caring? The interview continued for another 20 minutes, but those words, the raw truth of systemic failure, would be what people remembered. When Beverly finally called cut, Mara collapsed back in her chair, exhausted but relieved. You did beautifully, Beverly said. This is going to make a difference. Mara looked at Roy, Nina, and Bridget. I hope so. They deserve that much. The interview aired that evening at 6 o'clock. Roy, Nina, Mara, and Bridget gathered in the living room to watch, though Mara kept her eyes mostly closed, listening to her own voice describe the unthinkable. Within minutes of the broadcast ending, Mara's phone began buzzing. Text messages, emails, social media notifications flooding in faster than she could read them. Nina's phone lit up too, then Roy's. The story was spreading. Some messages were supportive. Survivors of similar situations sharing their stories, people offering help and resources. Others expressed outrage at the system's failures. But mixed among them were hostile comments. People defending Granger Falls, accusing Mara of attacking the town's reputation. Anonymous messages calling her a liar, attention seeker, worse. Don't read those, Bridget said, taking Mara's phone. They don't matter, but they did matter in their way. They proved Mara's point about how communities protect themselves rather than confront uncomfortable truths. By 8 o'clock, the story had gone viral. News outlets across the country picked it up. Cable networks requested follow-up interviews. Social media was ablaze with discussions about missing persons, protocols, and systemic failures. Sheriff Hutchins called at 8:30, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. You've created a situation here, Barrett. My department is being flooded with calls, media requests, accusations of negligence. Then maybe your department should have done its job, Roy said calmly. We followed protocol. Protocol failed. That's the point. Mara's not attacking individuals, she's exposing a broken system. If that makes you uncomfortable, good. It should. Hutchins hung up without responding. The real shift came the next morning. 2 women contacted the state investigators with new information. One had encountered Eugene Fairmont in 2012, said he'd offered to help when her car broke down. Something in his manner had frightened her, and she'd refused. She'd never reported it because nothing had actually happened, but after seeing Mara's interview, she realized she might have been a near miss. The second woman had been Eugene's neighbor in 2015. She'd noticed strange things, soundproofing materials being delivered, odd hours, a sense that something wasn't right. She'd mentioned it to local police, but nothing came of it. After the interview, guilt drove her to come forward again with details she'd remembered. By Monday morning, pressure was mounting for a complete review of missing persons protocols. County officials announced an independent investigation into how Mara's case and others had been handled. The state attorney general's office opened an inquiry. That afternoon, a town meeting was called at Granger Falls Community Center. The room was packed, standing room only, tensions high. Roy, Nina, and Mara attended despite knowing they'd face hostility. The moderator, a county official named Preston, opened the floor. Immediately people stood to voice opinions. "This town is being dragged through the mud," one man said. "We're not all monsters. Most of us are good people." "No one said otherwise," Nina called from the back. "But good people can still be complicit through inaction." "Easy for you to say," a woman responded. "You're not from here. You don't understand our community. I understand that a woman was imprisoned for 9 months and no one noticed," Nina shot back. The room erupted in competing voices. Preston struggled to maintain order. Roy stood, and something in his bearing made people quiet down. "I'm 59 years old," Roy said. "I've been invisible most of my life. Lost my job, lost my home, spent weeks living in my truck. Society decided I didn't matter anymore. So I understand what it feels like to be overlooked, dismissed, forgotten. That's why I can't stay silent about what happened to Mara." He gestured to where she sat. "She didn't come here to attack anyone. She came here to make sure it doesn't happen again. If that makes you defensive, ask yourself why. Is it because you're being falsely accused, or because the truth is uncomfortable?" Silence followed. Then, unexpectedly, Phyllis Crane stood from her seat near the front. "Roy's right," she said, her voice carrying. "I've lived here my whole life. I knew Eugene Fairmont. I heard whispers over the years about odd behavior, strange habits. I never said anything because it seemed easier not to. Because he was a neighbor, because confrontation is uncomfortable." She turned to face Mara. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry I didn't speak up, didn't push harder, didn't make it my business when maybe I should have." Her honesty broke something open. Another person stood, then another. Not everyone, but enough. People admitting they'd heard things, seen things, chosen not to investigate because it was easier to look away. One older man spoke about seeing Eugene with a young woman in his truck years ago, how she'd seemed frightened, but he'd convinced himself it was none of his business. A woman talked about finding missing person flyers and dismissing them as not relevant to their quiet town. The confessions weren't universal. Some people remained defensive, insistent that they bore no responsibility. But the wall of denial had cracked. Near the end of the meeting, a younger woman approached Mara. She was crying, clutching a photograph. "My mother," she said, showing the picture. "Jennifer Solis. She disappeared 11 years ago. Police said she probably abandoned her route, started a new life. But she wouldn't have done that. She had me, had family." She looked at Mara with desperate hope. "You're giving her story attention again. You're making people remember she existed." "Thank you for that." Mara embraced her, both women crying. Around them, the room had grown quiet, watching this moment of shared grief and recognition. As they left the meeting, Roy noticed Hutchins standing by his patrol car. The sheriff looked older somehow, worn down. "State's recommending I resign," Hutchins said. "Investigations being transferred to state level. They're reopening every cold case from the past 30 years. "That's what should have happened from the start," Roy said, not unkindly. Hutchins nodded slowly. "Maybe you're right. Maybe we all looked away when we should have been paying attention." 2 months after the interview, spring arrived in full force. The house on Maple Ridge had transformed in ways that went beyond fresh paint and repaired floorboards. The cellar entrance had been sealed permanently, the sub-basement filled with concrete. What had been a tomb was now just earth and stone, buried and silent. Mara testified at county hearings about reforms to missing persons protocols. Her testimony, along with mounting public pressure, led to new procedures requiring cross-jurisdictional communication, mandatory follow-up on reports, and dedicated resources for adult missing persons cases. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. The investigation into Eugene's other properties yielded results. At the house he'd owned in 2010, searchers found remains buried in the backyard. Dental records confirmed it was Linda Pacheco. Her family finally had answers, finally had closure after 13 years of not knowing. Jennifer Solis remained missing, her case still open, but investigators were pursuing new leads based on Eugene's journal entries and property records. Her daughter visited Granger Falls to thank Mara personally, and they'd stayed in touch, two women bound by loss and hope. Mara's advocacy work expanded beyond her own case. She partnered with a non-profit that helped survivors rebuild their lives, obtaining identification, navigating assistance programs, reconnecting with support systems. She spoke at conferences, trained law enforcement, shared her story, not for attention, but for change. Roy's handyman business had grown steadily. Word spread that he was reliable, honest, reasonably priced. He'd hired an assistant, a young man from town who needed work and training. Roy found satisfaction in passing on skills, in being someone's answer instead of someone's problem. On a warm Saturday in May, they worked together in the backyard. The space had been overgrown when they'd arrived, wild and neglected. Now it held possibility. They'd cleared the weeds, tilled the soil, marked out garden plots. Roy turned earth with a spade, dark soil rich and ready. Nina knelt nearby, planting seeds from packets they'd bought at Crane Hardware. Tomatoes, peppers, squash, herbs. Mara followed with a watering can, giving each planted seed a drink. Bridget had driven up for the weekend, joining them in the garden. She planted marigolds along the border, bright orange and yellow against the dark soil. These were Mum's favorites, she told Mara. She'd want them here. Their mother had finally accepted that Mara was alive, though she struggled with the reality of what had happened. Their father remained distant, unable to process the trauma. Healing happened at different speeds for everyone. They worked in comfortable silence, occasionally laughing at small things, Roy's dirt-covered hands, Nina's crooked rows, Mara's over-enthusiastic watering. The ordinariness of it was revolutionary. 6 months ago, Mara had been dying in darkness. Now she was planting seeds in sunlight. "What made you think of a garden?" Bridget asked. Roy paused, leaning on his spade. Needed something living here. Something that grows instead of just surviving. Seemed right. As afternoon shadows lengthened, they finished planting. The garden looked small and vulnerable, just dark soil and tiny green shoots emerging. But it was a beginning. Inside, they washed up and prepared dinner together. The kitchen, that had once been the entry point to Mara's prison, was now a place of nourishment and conversation. They'd reclaimed the space through deliberate use, through filling it with life. Over dinner, Mara shared news. "I've been offered a position with the non-profit, full-time advocacy coordinator. It would mean traveling, speaking at events, training sessions." "That's wonderful," Nina said. "You'd be amazing at that." "It would also mean leaving here eventually. Finding my own place, building an independent life again." Mara looked around the table. "Which I need to do. But I want you to know this place. This time with you all. It saved me as much as opening that door did." "You're always welcome here," Roy said. "This is your home as long as you need it." "I know. That's what makes it possible to leave, knowing I can always come back." After dinner, they sat on the porch as the sun set. The view was simple, fields, trees, the long driveway leading to the road. But it held a peace they'd all been searching for. Nina had decided to stay in Granger Falls permanently. Her freelance work thrived, and she'd found community here. She was considering buying the small house down the road that had just gone on the market. "We'd be neighbors," she told Roy. "Close enough to help each other, far enough for privacy." Roy liked that idea. He'd rebuilt his life not into what it had been, but into something better. At 59, he'd learned that worth wasn't measured in salary or status, but in connection and purpose. He mattered here to these people, in these small daily acts of caring. Mara pulled out her phone, opened the camera.
Can we take a picture?
They gathered close, arms around each other, smiling into the lens. Mara captured the moment, 4 people who'd found each other through tragedy and chosen to become family. "This is going on the website," Mara said, reviewing the photo. "Proof that recovery is possible. That healing happens. That people can choose to care when it would be easier not to." As darkness fell, they remained on the porch, talking quietly about tomorrow's plans. Roy would help Phyllis repair her store's loading dock. Nina had a design deadline. Mara was drafting a speech for next month's conference. Bridget would drive home in the morning, but promised to return in 2 weeks. Ordinary plans for ordinary days. But underneath the mundane was something profound. The recognition that they'd all been saved and were all still saving each other. Rescue wasn't a single moment, but an ongoing commitment to see each other, to care when caring was difficult, to choose connection over convenience. Inside the house, they'd left the kitchen light on. It glowed warm through the window, a beacon in the darkness. Mara looked at it and smiled. She'd spent 9 months in darkness, believing no one would come. She'd been wrong. Someone had come. Someone had listened. Someone had cared enough to break down walls and pull her into light. And now she was passing that gift forward, making sure others wouldn't have to wait in darkness as long as she had. The garden they'd planted would grow. The seeds they'd sown, both literal and metaphorical, would take root and flourish. The house on Maple Ridge had been built to hide secrets. Now it held something different: hope, healing, and the quiet, revolutionary act of people choosing to matter to each other.